thank you to everyone here in Richmond. I will make my introduction very short since I don't fit on the camera. But thank you, Lucy and Kelly, for agreeing to be here with us today. We are so excited to be discussing Lucy's inspiring career, and clearly, based on the attendance in the room, it's going to be a fantastic program. I hope everyone will feel free to interact, ask questions, but at that, I will kick it off to Kelly.
Thanks, Kathleen. Welcome, everyone. We are delighted to have Lucy. We want to thank you for your patience and finally getting us here. I know we were supposed to do this last fall, but a thing called a hurricane came through and delayed that, and then we had other complications with weather. So thank you for your patience, and thank you for all the pre-planning that you've done with Kathleen and me and getting us here. So we really appreciate you taking the time. Guys, I'm going to do a quick intro of our friend Lucy. Then she's going to give us a brief overview description of the MSRB and how she got involved. And then I'm going to ask some questions that we thought might be relevant for all of us in our careers and what we do every day and how we've gotten where we are. But we do want you to feel free to interject, ask questions, comment, agree or disagree. We really do want it to be interactive. We're not here to sit and talk at you. We want to talk with you, if that's okay with you guys. So I'll dive right in. Lucy was raised in Front Royal, Virginia. She graduated from Randolph-Macon Women's College with a BA in economics. She landed in Richmond in the management trainee program at First and Merchants Bank, formerly Nations Bank, Sovereign, now Bank of America. Lucy, I think I have you beat, though, on bank pens. I've got 6. She had a short stint with the treasurer at the holding company, the Money Market Center, sort of like a bond department that we know today. She stayed 8 years there, and then she moved on to Davenport. And there she stepped into a role as an institutional sales rep, and she was the first female sales rep on Main Street here in Richmond. And she went on to become the head of sales and trading at Davenport, which she still, to this day, is serving in 38 years later. She joined the MSRB in 2014, stepping into the role as the chair for the season 2017-2018, and her reign ended September 30th of last fall. But she's still very actively involved. As I said, she continues to manage sales and trading at Davenport, and she serves on their executive board. So with that, Lucy, how did you get involved with the MSRB, and give us a brief history about that and maybe comments about the board itself? I don't think it's on.
It dropped, so there it is. Is that better?
There it is. Now it's on.
Here. Thank you. So I have to be very careful here because sitting in the room is Maju Kanirawala, our esteemed treasurer of the Commonwealth, who is currently sitting on the board of the MSRB, and Dean Pope, who sat on the board 20 years ago or so. So I'm sure they'll be quick to correct me when I say something wrong. I'll be very broad, but and you may know some of this, but the MSRB was formed through an act of Congress in 1975. And the initial purpose, and still the mission, is to protect individual investors by promoting a fair and efficient marketplace. That was
He can't. Now he can. If I do that, that'll.
Thank you.
You got it. Thank you. So 1975, and as a self-regulatory organization, we are similar in many ways to what is now FINRA and the SEC. The difference is that we have no examination or enforcement authority, the major difference. So rulemaking was how we started, and proceeded through Dean's years. Dean and I were talking before the meeting. The work is the people, the board, as well as the staff, are interesting people, highly engaged and ethical people doing fascinating work. Believe it or not, rulemaking, fascinating work. And proceeded until along the path of protecting investors. Then in 2010, Dodd-Frank. So in addition to protecting investors, the MSRB was charged with protecting issuers, which was interesting in and of itself because in many ways issuers didn't want to be protected and maybe still don't want to be protected. They're not subject to our rules, but they're subject to our protection, if you will. In 10 years ago, exactly 10 years ago, Emma was launched. And many of you, most all of you, would use Emma in some form or fashion. So a fast 10 years. So over the course of that 10 years, technology and data has become an increasingly important part of what the MSRB does. We're the primary repository for the data in the marketplace, not only new issue, but trading data, dissemination of trading data, and so forth. And with that has come an increase to almost 50%, not quite, but almost 50% of the MSRB's budget is related to technology. Not a lot different probably from where you are in your various workplaces in terms of technology. So that is a very broad overview of what we do. I became involved in 2000 when I was asked to join a profession. There are a couple committees that serve the organization. One is the Professional Qualifications Committee. And what that committee does, and there were several versions of that, but I served on the principal committee, which meant reviewing test questions, writing test questions for the Series 53. And so I served on that committee for 7 years. And after that, as I was involved with people on staff and other people in the industry, I was interested in applying for the board. So I did in 2007. And the process is similar to now, in that you write a formal application right about at this time of year, and then the process carries forth through the next several months. If you're fortunate enough, you're asked for a in-person interview, and I was in 2007, but I wasn't asked to join the board. So close but no cigar, I guess is what you say. Anyway, and that was probably the right time in my life not to serve on the board because of other obligations away from work too. Then as part of Dodd-Frank, the composition of the board also changed to the requirement is and became that the board have a majority of public non-regulated members. It didn't dictate the number 21, but that's what we ended up with. So 21 members currently, 11 non-regulated, 10 regulated, and within each of those categories, there are different. There are broker in the regulated. There are broker dealers, there are MAs, there are bankers, etc. And in the non-regulated, there are investors and so forth, issuers, investors, and so forth. So in 2014, I was encouraged again to apply, so I did apply again, and also made it to the interviews, and then made it to the board that time. And I think probably originally I was asked to serve on that committee because I had been engaged with groups like this. For the regulated side, it was the old Bond Market Association, which is now SIFMA, and also now the BDA. But I mean, we have NABL, we have the National Association of State Treasurers, municipal advisors, of
financial advisors. There are all kinds of organizations like that in which you get to know people in the industry, and probably that's how I was asked to serve on that committee originally. I meant to say that to you. So 2014, I joined the board, and happy to take questions about the work, certainly, and challenges, and Manju can help me out with that, as you know, if you have questions about that. Also during that time, we extended board terms from 3 to 4 years because the learning curve, really, the first year, you're a little bit deer in headlights in a way. And it's been less so, I think, in the last couple of years, but it's a fast and furious process, really, in terms of the work, what you learn, what you do. So the extension of terms made a good deal of sense, and that passed the SEC fairly easily. Changing anything in A3 is not easy, but that one was not a problem. So I actually, in terms of the officers of the board, the chair of the board, you self-nominate if you want to run for that position, and then there's an election. So I did that going into my third year because I was encouraged to do so, and didn't win. And I said, well, I won't do that again. But truly. And then again was encouraged to do so for my fourth year. So that's so. And it's usually, it's not always a contested position, but in my experience, it's been 2 people or so that run for a position every year, and you also run for the vice chair position, for what that's worth. So I guess that's a little inside scoop, and hopefully a bit interesting.
I find it interesting, the self-nomination, and I think I think all of us often, no matter where you roll, you've got chances to step up to the plate and do that. And what I sort of observed, and even within myself, sometimes I might have hesitated because I was like, oh my God, that's too arrogant for me to do that. I mean, you really need to think about it. But it's interesting, I didn't know there was a self-nomination, so it allowed you to take your interests further and step into that role. So that I didn't know that. So thank you for sharing that. Does anybody have any questions about the structure of the board itself before we dive into a couple of these questions? Well, here's a fun one, and I think it's at top of mind with all of us, no matter what we do. None of us have gotten to where we are today without mentors. What are your thoughts about the importance of mentorship, and maybe relate a personal experience?
I think that I've been mentored all along the way, and certainly both by females and by males. It's, you know, that's not, there's not a gender bias on that one, luckily. And it started, for me, it started very young. As my doctor was a woman, so she'd become a doctor in the 1920s. Graduate of Randall-Macon Women's College.
Oh, wow.
And then teachers along the way. Certainly, then I'm so much older than all of you, but when I went to college, I mean, in Virginia, you couldn't even go to UVA, right? Because women were not admitted. And so the Women's College was a great source of strength in terms of the friendships that you built there, and the relationships professor-wise. So when I got my first job, I went to the management training program, and I think that I didn't even know what management I was being trained for, frankly. It's true. Which was in a bank, typically branch managership. So I determined in not very many months that was probably not what I wanted to do for the long term, for the long haul. So I went to work, stepped out of that program in just about less than 6 months, I guess, and went to work for a gentleman named Bill Colby, who was the treasurer of the holding company and then took over the money market center bond department. So he and Ham Shearer were great mentors to me in terms of letting me spread my wings. And then when I didn't leave the bank unhappily. I was in institutional sales the last 3 years that I was there, 2 or 3 years that I was there, and I was recruited to Davenport. So it was and we might talk about that later, but it was a sideways move. It wasn't a move up. It was, didn't leave unhappily, but a small firm seemed like a good opportunity to me. And I got there, and again, along the way, Coley Wortham was a tremendous mentor for me and supporter, and I've watched as our firm has grown how he hired, he didn't hire me, but how he hired some very strong women, and I think I've heard him say that's a great source of pride for him, which you wouldn't necessarily, that may be a surprise to somebody, but it's, that's been tricky. And then in outside activities, which have been so fulfilling to me, board, not only the MSRB, but service on my college board and other boards. I found there that at the MSRB, Lynette Kelly is, is an inspirational leader, I believe, and then women that I served with on my college board. I mean, they're almost innumerable in terms of their impressive levels of strength.
So I guess the message there is that no matter what stage of your life, there's an opportunity to either be a mentor or to be mentored, either directly or indirectly. I know we talked about it earlier. I know I wouldn't be where I am, and several of you in this room I grew up with you in my industry, in this banking industry, in the trust world, and I just know indirectly there were so many mentors that I looked up to and wanted to be as smart as they were, be as knowledgeable, as organized, or whatever. And I think the big message for anybody, I think mentoring is so key to all of us, no matter where you are and what you're doing. And put yourself out there. I think we talked about that, and Lucy expressed to me that maybe need to do more of it, even at this point, 38 years in the industry. It's never too late to, I think, put yourself out there, to be a mentor, or to even be a mentee yourself. I mean, I've been in banking 36 years, and there are people that I would love to sit down with and learn more, because I think the day I quit learning is the day I throw in the towel. But I think we both agree that mentorship is so key, and I think it's something that this association really has an opportunity to do more of and capture, I think, that opportunity amongst all of us. I mean, just look in this room. The cross-reference of strengths and knowledge and success, no matter what stage of life you're in. So we did want to highlight and just focus on that first one that we just deemed a very important concept.
I think I did. I would say that in mentally preparing for this, it occurred to me that I probably haven't been as intentional about mentoring people as I should have been along the way. And I'm not quite sure why that is. I mean, it's not that I don't care. I certainly care a lot about people. But I was sort of in this time where I started working at a time where corporations were looking for women to join. I mean, they had to hire women. So things were a little easier for me than they appear to be right now for young women. And maybe young men too. It's a different generation. So I still have more thought to give that, I think.
Well, that leads us to another key question we had talked about is, what do you think is the most significant barrier to female leadership right now? We continue to hear that women are still challenged. You think about the squeaky wheel gets the oil. We're also perceived as being overly aggressive. And you made a quote: women tend to get in their own way. You want to expand on that a little bit?
Sometimes women get in their own way. You still can't hear me? Sorry. Cut that off.
I'm so sorry. I'm getting some feedback.
There you go.
And I'm still, again, interrupt me anytime.
Sorry.
That's okay. No. Again, I've tried to give this a lot of thought. In terms of barriers, I mean, I think there are real barriers. I understand that. But I think there are some barriers we impose on ourselves, or we aren't confident enough. And I think confidence is really key. And there's a difference in being confident. You know your abilities, and you know you're bright, right? But sometimes, as we try to demonstrate our confidence, we may be aggressive. And it's okay to be aggressive, but if you're aggressive with a chip or aggressive with the expectation that the world or my job or somebody owes me something, then I think that's what I mean by getting in our own way, if you will.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes I know there are real barriers, and I know there are demons out there, but I think for the most part there are not. And that some of us were lucky enough to be maybe blessed. Moms always tell us, you're great, you're going to be great, but to be blessed with a dad who told you can do anything is really a fantastic experience to have had.
Yeah, I agree. One of the challenges I think we all face in this room in particular is burnout. How do you manage staying engaged? I know you're an intense, the sales and trading can be very intense. The bond world can be very intense. Trying to get a bond deal to market and all the documents and all the signatures and all the stuff that goes in behind it and the FA work and all of that. How do you manage to stay engaged and make sure that burnout doesn't kill you, so to speak?
There are a number of ways, but I think primarily, of course, when you're sitting in a sales and trading room is different from, other venues, but it's important to me to laugh every day. And when you're sitting around 20 type A's, you're probably going to laugh there's a lot of enjoyment in the group of people I'm around. So and 38 years later, I still enjoy and I'm happy to come to work every day.
Wow.
There's that. But I've also, it's those, besides your wonderful family and friends, which are top of the list, right? Those outside activities help prevent, the 100% focus on those things that you do every single day. So, those diversions probably are the source of my lack of burnout.
Got it. When do you know it's time to look for opportunities elsewhere? I know you'd mentioned how you got to Davenport, but what do you think? We often wonder, no matter what stage you're in, maybe think you've got to make some changes, or when do you think, is it just you go out on the high, or you just force the issue, or what do you think about that, the change in opportunities?
I think it's the move to Davenport was somebody asking me if I wanted to come, so that that was a gift in a way. I'd been there 18 or so years 19 when I still have a sales role, but sort of a minor part of my function. But I took over the management of sales and trading in 2000. And I think that was probably when, somebody was, again, small organization, so somebody was easing out of the management into strictly sales. And so that seemed to me to be a new challenge. It was an opportunity for a new challenge. And it wasn't necessarily, I think I've told Kelly that if I had stayed in a strictly sales function, I probably in my career would have been compensated more highly than I am now. So it's not about making more money. It was just about the challenge of doing something and maybe helping other people have success.
I think that's a great point. I know some young women that I've mentored, I caution them and say, be careful what you wish for. It's not all about the money. If you don't enjoy the people that you're interacting with every day and the knowledge and the integrity and the people that you get to work with, you need to be very careful about that salary versus the career thing. Because I see so many people make a dive for the wrong reasons because they're going to get this big bump in salary. And it ends up being not what they wanted, expected, or needed, really. So I think that's a great point to always keep that in mind for sure. I'm going to ask you one more question, then I want to see if there are any questions from this crew. What skills do you find that you use most often over your course of your career, successful career?
I think I'm a good listener. I think I'm self-aware. I believe that and I hope I'm kind.
We were talking about kindness goes a
I
long
hope
way.
I'm kind. I am not perfect, I can tell you that. Really not perfect. But I also, besides a listener, I believe I'm a keen observer. So I do, all those Myers-Briggs and so forth, those all tell me that I'm an observer. And and that's been helpful to me with interactions and hopefully with helping other people.
Mm-hmm.
So
excellent.
And I do have a positive outlook.
We need that. Oh, we can get that. Well, guys, does anyone have any questions? We wanted to stay committed to having you done by 1 o'clock, but we'd love it if anybody has a particular question for Lucy. Kathleen?
You spoke earlier about confidence being really important, and I was just wondering if you had any insights on ways for those of us in the audience to maybe find that confidence, things that we can do that will bring I know for me, I tackled public speaking. That was something that always terrified me. I gained a lot of confidence if I could really do it. And that was an easy one for me to point to. But do you have any other suggestions for people on things that they need to do to sort of bring that confidence to themselves?
The question is about confidence for those of you listening from afar, and suggestions on about how you strengthen that and make it work towards your advancement and your own self-worth.
That's a tough one, Shelley, and that, again, I felt blessed by, by having parents that sort of imbued that. But still, I think if you observe around you and are self-aware, then you will see, right, that you have great capabilities, and it's just then honing in on what's maybe of greatest interest to you. It's not all of us are lucky enough to be doing exactly what we love to do. Some of us fell into it, certainly. but I don't know. I mean, I don't. Kelly and I talk too. But I don't read self-help books. I don't really, but I do. I love to read, and I like biography. So reading about people and life experiences and applying those to yourself, and novels too. I mean, I read lots of novels about strong women in various eras. So that's not great help, but maybe a little.
Do you think it's helpful? I think we should all be open to having somebody approach us to say, how are you doing that? I mean, I love how you do that. I mean, I remember the public speaking thing was terrifying. And I've gone through some incredible, oh boy, you feel this big. And, I think talking in front of your peers is probably one of the hardest things to do outside of talking to 1,000 people, because there's nothing like talking to your own peers. But I think, I think it's okay to approach somebody to sit and say, hey, you want to have a cup of coffee? And tell me how you got where you are. You're able to sit around. And my brothers have sworn I could talk to bark off a tree. I've been able to talk all my life. But my sister, who's a major introvert, cannot. And, I feel badly. But, there are other things that she's got these strengths. And she's always, looked at me and thought I was confident, but I wasn't. Inside, I was like a ball of nerves doing stuff. So I think being able to
that
ask
happened
people.
to me when you apply now. I don't know if it was always this way, Dean, but when you self-nominate to be chair of the board, you have to make a little. And I'm not speaking as one of my least favorite things to do, if you can't tell. But you have to make to just the board, no staff. You have to make a little 3-minute, 5-minute talk about why you want to be. And both times I did, I was so nervous I could hardly talk. And so it turned out, because people knew me anyway. But one of the women afterwards said that her mother told her that kind of nervousness was a display, really sort of an ultimate display of respect for those people that were around you. I said, what a wonderful, of course she was making me feel better about how I was, but what a nice perspective.
That is a nice perspective. One more quick question. Go ahead.
So you mentioned that you like to read. Are there any particular leadership books that you have read and that you enjoy?
Questions about leadership books that you've read?
I haven't read one in a long time, and all those, the Good to Greats and all that, I've certainly read once upon a time, but I don't know that I've never. I can't say that there is. It's really come more from biography or historical fiction, I guess. So. We talked about that along the way, even with Kathleen, 6 months ago, as we were talking about this, and it's not something that I do.
Dean, did you have a question?
Yeah, as you noted, the MSRB has had some statutorily imposed mission creep. In the good old days, a simple job protecting the investors.
Mm-hmm.
Has broadening it to include issuers, in your view, created any tensions or problems or even conflicts of interest, because the interests of issuers and the interests of investors are not identical?
The question is about, as the mission of the MSRB has expanded to include issuers as well, protection of issuers as well as investors, has that created conflicts? I mean, I think, and Manju probably could, as an issuer, could comment even better than I, but it does create this sense of walking a finer line, because issuers really do not. I mean, we had over the last year, when I sat on a couple roundtables that included issuers and issuer groups, there was a lot of distress over state, things that we thought were aiding compliance. It wasn't even rulemaking, but meant to be helpful aids for compliance were taken as edicts or rules, and so it's difficult. It is difficult, and you know, one of the things that we mentioned that, you know, we're talking about challenges for the MSRB going forward, and I've mentioned technology and the, you know, and how in so many ways that's impacting us, and it's also the shrinking of the number of dealers, the shrinking of the number of MAs is one. But then I think the next thing I would say after those couple would be, you know, how do you maneuver that difficult? Manju,
No, I think what you said, you know, makes a lot of sense. What concerns the issuers is more that this might be a basket towards starting to regulate issuers. That's at the heart of, you know, what Lucy was talking about, walking a fine line. When trying to work with issuers, that since the SRB doesn't have authority to regulate overseas issuers, but how do you protect them without, you know, say that thou shalt do X, Y, Z, which MSRB can't say.
Right.
So Lucy's exactly right. Very well-intentioned measures that MSRB took last year to put out some educational materials on its website, some white papers, some guides, and issuer, not individual issuers, but the trade associations, you know, to issue with that. They're like, hey, you're creeping into our territory. That's our job. Congress didn't tell you to do that. You know, we are the ones who educate our issuers, and we don't want MSRB to know. Because they just see little things like this that MSRB and SEC has. We always worry about the Tower Amendment and, you know, move to abolish that.
Great question.
Yeah. Well, folks, we are almost at the top of the hour. Want to thank you for your attendance. This is great. Thank you for everybody that's out there and the other areas watching in. Sorry if we've had, you know, if you couldn't hear us very well. It's the first time we've done this, but Lucy, we want to thank you for your participation and your willingness to come talk to us. We very much appreciate it. I know Lucy would be happy to talk to you afterwards or be available to talk to pretty much any time. She's right here on Main Street, and she certainly is willing to talk and help us out. So thank you very much. We appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.